welcome back to my channel. My name is Maria, and I sewed so many dresses this summer that I couldn't fit them into one video. So today we are going to be wrapping up the rest of my dresses, some of the fancier ones that I sewed at the end of the summer, and yeah, I think we can jump right in. So now we're moving on to another early 14th century coat. I promise you, I have some later period stuff coming up. But my next project was a purple coat. This one is slightly later than my red and blue coats. It has a wider and lower neckline with no slit, which places it sort of first quarter of the 14th century. I think it's a good 20s look. The sleeve shape is even more pronounced than on the red coat. The buttons are metal instead of cloth. The forearms are again skin tight, and the upper arms are way more bloused out. They have a lot of volume. I've been calling them the Darth Maul sleeves in my head, although I know that's not a period term, probably. This dress has led to a lot of very interesting conversations about the color purple. There is an assumption that purple means royalty throughout all of the Middle Ages. However, I think it's worth pointing out that this shade of purple is not actually Tyrian purple. It's not snail derived. It's not the color of an ancient Roman emperor. Rather, this color would have been achieved in the period using lichen dyes. The lichens used to produce purple dye would have been available in Scotland for a large part of medieval history. I believe also Scandinavia, Ireland, and the west of England. Don't quote me on that. And we know that they were used in the early medieval period. However, they seem to have disappeared from the record a bit. I don't think we can document them very well throughout the high medieval period. In 1300, however, or starting in 1300, the purple dye came back into fashion as it was exported from Italy.
Right, so when did they disappear?
It's kind of vague and mushy. We know it was used in the early medieval period. We don't really know if it was used or not in the high medieval period. Mm-hmm. And then we know it came back into fashion as an exported dye around 1300. There were also no sumptuary laws regulating the color purple in the early 14th century. The very first sumptuary laws, I think, mostly dealt with food, and the sumptuary laws that actually regulated what people could wear came about in 1363. So we are well clear of that threshold. Purple is legal as long as you can afford it. However, this would have been quite an expensive color, being quite a strong, difficult to dye color, an imported dye. Lichen is also not known for its color fastness. And on top of that, I also cut this dress with even fuller skirts than usual, so even more fabric consumed. And the buttons are gilded, so that's a flex. I've styled this dress again with my very worn out pink belt. I need to replace it. The fittings on that are also from Armor and Castings. I've also got the same brooch as I showed off with the last two coats, but this time I've done my hair differently. As I said earlier, 14th century women's hair could be a bit riskier than early medieval head coverings would allow. So we're seeing more visible side braids and also things like little hair snails or Princess Leia buns. We see those in quite a few sources, including the Tameth Hours. And we see them in German sources more commonly than the temple braids. My hair is still a bit too short to do these well, so I've just kind of ended up with little teddy bear ears. I was sick of my wimple, and I hope this is kind of close enough, especially with a veil covering their sins. With that, I am wearing a fillet. I wove this one as well. I realize the word fillet may be a bit confusing because it describes a couple of different things. We've got the simple, or sometimes embroidered, linen fillets that act as headbands to anchor early medieval veils. Then we've got the stiffer crown-like fillets, which would have been made out of white linen and worn by fashionable women in the 13th and early 14th century. And now we've got woven silk fillets, which could be adorned with mounts or pearls and things like that. So this is the third kind of fillet. I wove it based off the same find. Again, my tablet weaving is a bit dodgy, so don't look too closely, but I like the effect it gives. On top of everything, I have pinned a silk gauze veil, which was surprisingly affordable. I expected silk to cost more, or silk gauze at least. But we see similar veils in a lot of manuscript images from the period. They're frequently drawn at insane angles to convey their lightness. And when I wore my gauze veil for the first time, I discovered that that is not an exaggeration at all, and a gauze veil will do that. I also wore my gauze veil for the first time at Blackness Castle? Is it a castle?
You were there, I wasn't there.
I wore my veil for the first time at Blackness, and it was quite windy, so my veil at times ended up vertical off of my head. I used very long pins, so it was secure and it wasn't going to blow away or anything like that, but a gauze veil will go crazy. There is another addition to my purple dress outfit that I would like to talk about, which was a project I've been planning since February. I know I've mentioned him quite a bit, but my partner Lewis bought me cloak clasps for Valentine's Day, and so I have needed to make a cloak to show them off for quite a while. I am actually, within my 14th century group, a bit of a cloak hater. I think that cloaks are a bit overrepresented in late medieval reenactment because we tend to see them in very specific contexts in manuscript images, and they're not a particularly practical warmth garment compared to something like a surcoat, which will keep the warmth trapped right against your body and allow you to move your arms freely. We do see cloaks as part of the habit of certain religious orders, such as the Blackfriars. We also see cloaks on some travelers and pilgrims. They are a bit more practical for traveling than they are for working in the fields, and the use that I focused on with my cloak, we see them in a high status sort of ceremonial context as mantles, frequently on women as well. These are going to be cut almost more like a bishop's cope than like a conventional cloak. So mine is just a large half circle of purple wool twill. It's lined with pale pink silk. I did have to piece it a bit because it's a lot of yardage. And it's held in place with 2 cloak clasps connected with a piece of purple tablet weave, which I did not make myself this time, so you can look at it. The cloak clasps are sewn in place, and I think it's worth pointing out that cloaks from the period are generally held on either with a cloak morse, which is sort of a frequently lozenge-shaped clasp. I don't know if this gesture makes any sense, that splits in half and kind of fastens together, or they can be held on by 2 separate bosses, which are then connected through their loops with some kind of cord or band. So I'm very proud of my purple cloak, and I enjoy opportunities to show it off. However, making this cloak has affirmed my cloak hater tendencies because it is so impractical compared to an early period rectangular cloak. It restricts my movement a bit. I need help getting upstairs between that and the past floor length dress, and because it's open in the front, it shows off my dress nicely, but it doesn't create any kind of microclimate or keep me very warm. So for colder events, I would recommend doing a wool surcoat, maybe lined in wool, maybe lined in fur. Someday, I dream of making a fur coat.
That's a surcoat with fur?
Yes. As opposed to like a fur coat.
Right, it's a fur coat.
C-O-T-E. Anyway.
Good.
So by the end of the season, I had enough clothing to cover me for the range of events that I had on the books, and I finally had a bit more time to branch out and make some fancier stuff. The first of my fancier stuff projects, I mean, I guess the purple should count as a fancier project, but my silk project was the kirtle I'm wearing right now. This is an early Tudor or late 15th century kirtle, It's based on the patterns given in the Queen's Servants, and I'm really happy with how it came out. Unlike my earlier kirtle, it has no sleeves at all. It also has lacing at the sides, so that there's an unbroken line across the neck here to wear under the V-neck of a Burgundian gown. This is quite a fancy kirtle for the fact that it is completely covered by my outer layers at shows, but I really love the pink color. It's a shot silk taffeta with yellow and magenta threads, so the final look is kind of this Barbie pink, reddish pink, but it looks really cool in the sunlight, and I'm proud of it. Also, unlike the other kirtle I made, the neckline and arm's eyes are bound instead of hemmed, which I really like as an approach. I think that worked better than just hemming everything. In the glamour shots for this kirtle, I paired them with a chaperon, not the kind for horses, but the coif that goes under a velvet hood to create an early French hood. I've seen a couple creators use this approach to a French hood, and I like it a lot more than the sort of paste crescent approach. And I will have to get around to sewing the actual velvet hood part, but for now I've styled the chaperon with the kirtle as a fun little informal shiny thing for this video. I also just finished it, and I really struggled with the gold silk frill thing, so I wanted to show it off. Also, for the sake of the glamour shot, I styled my kirtle with a disc belt, which is also from Armor and Castings. The skirt on this kirtle, unlike my other pink kirtle, flares out from the waist. There's no pleating, so it's kind of cut in a truncated cone shape. I sewed this kirtle to pair with my most recent project, which was a black wool Burgundian gown. This is a style seen in the later part of the 15th century, although at the very end of the century there is a transition to tighter kirtle-fitted gowns instead. My gown in particular is made of black wool worsted. Black was a very popular color in the 15th century as it was a very expensive color to dye, and it is trimmed with rabbit fur. I don't feel comfortable using fake fur because I really worry about shedding and microplastics and stuff like that. And also, as a reenactor, I spend a fair amount of time around fires. So I try to avoid synthetics because I don't want something to melt into my skin. However, I also don't want to create demand for any kind of endangered fur, so I am most comfortable using fur that is a byproduct of an animal which is commonly eaten. So for example, the source that I went to for my rabbit fur gets it as a byproduct from rabbits that are butchered for consumption, and to me that feels like a more ethical solution as it prevents wastage and doesn't put more plastic into the environment. Another possible option is using furs bought from vintage stores or thrift stores and things like that, as it doesn't create a new demand for fur. You're using fur that has already been circulating. But fur ethics are tricky, and I do understand that some people aren't comfortable using animal products in that way at all, and I don't mean to come across as judgmental. This is just what I felt comfortable with and what I wanted to use for my gown. But as you can see, there is a deep V-neck that's pretty consistent across depictions of the Burgundian gown. There are quite straight, tight sleeves, which are also trimmed in a deep fur cuff, and fur is such a pain to work with. The dress is also lined in black linen to avoid building up too much weight, and I think it's pretty comfortable to wear. The body of it is cut kind of as a big trapezoid with some shaping for the shoulders and the neckline and stuff, so there is no structure built into it, and instead the folds are controlled by a wide leather belt, which is also from Armor and Castings. My pendant is backwards. It is also from Armor and Castings, It's based, I believe, on a portrait of Mary of Burgundy, and while it is sold as a brooch pendant, I don't have a frontlet for my Hennin, so I've just been wearing it on a chain, and I like it a lot. I think it's cute. By far the trickiest part of this outfit to execute was the Hennin. The Hennin refers to a family of headdresses that were popular in the 15th century. Early on, this included the Templar style headdress, which was quite a wide, almost cowhorn shaped piece, the heart-shaped Hennin, which could include a padded roll, and tires. Later on in the century, it evolved into the Steeple Hennin, which is what we think of when we imagine a medieval princess. It's the tall, pointy, cone-shaped hat. However, in Britain, the Truncated Hennin was popular rather than the Steeple Hennin, and that is a small, cut-off cone that is shaped a bit like an upside-down flower pot. We are not entirely sure how Hennins work and were constructed, but there are a couple of theories. There are 3 different approaches to constructing the base, I think. Firstly, using leather. Secondly, using basketry or wicker. And thirdly, using paste buckram, which is very coarse linen coated with animal glue. I am a fan of the buckram approach, so I built my Hennin by cutting out all of the pieces from paste buckram and sewing wire around the edges to give it some strength and durability. I covered that basic frame in 2 layers of cotton damet to hide the texture of the buckram, which is quite distinctly coarse, and then I covered the whole thing in black silk. There is a linen lining as well, because I wanted it to look neat on the inside. The second major problem with constructing a Hennin is keeping it on your head. Again, we're not entirely sure how that worked in the period, and there are a couple of different variables to that. The problem is that the truncated Hennin very frequently sits quite far back on the head and almost projects more back than up, and I wanted to achieve that angle with my Hennin. Unfortunately, I have quite short hair, as I've said, so I couldn't construct the braids or the sewn roll of hair that is potentially used to prop things up. I also didn't want to use modern hair clips or anything like that, and I wanted to find a reasonably plausible, authentic solution, or as well as I can do without more documentation. There's a theory that the black loops shown in some depictions of the Hennin are velvet or fabric-covered wire, and I'm not a massive fan of that interpretation. I've seen reconstructions done with wire, and I've heard people describe them as a bit uncomfortable, and we have so many depictions of Hennins that don't show the forehead loop that I think there has to be some authentic way to do it without relying on wire. I have seen pop history sites claim that the Hennin was held on via loops around the ears, which again, I don't really like. I've only ever seen 2 depictions of Hennins with anything around the ear, and in the vast majority of depictions we see the ear outside of the Hennin and with nothing around it. So again, there has to be a way to achieve that without relying on the ear loops, and also the ear loops sound very uncomfortable. In the end, my solution was to create a velvet headband or fillet, so that's a 4th type of fillet in this wrap-up, which provides friction. Velvet has a pile in the same way that if you pet a wiry dog one way, it'll feel bristly, and the other way it'll feel smooth. And if you orient the velvet around your head right, it creates enough friction to keep a Hennin on quite comfortably. So I'm happy with how mine worked out. Also, I know religious women nowadays, some at least, will use velvet headbands to keep heavier components of their headdresses anchored, like the padding that's used. So I think that's fun. It's a cute little continuity. That is all I have for today, so I guess the question is, what's next? I've really missed doing 18th century, and I am working on kit for that. I have been sewing a pair of stays by hand, which was smart. And I'm also planning on doing some more fancy 16th century stuff and focusing a bit on early period because I haven't done any nice Anglo-Saxon or Norman or Viking stuff, and it feels like an oversight. Going forward, we're going to be posting a bit more sewing content and possibly cooking and stuff like that if you guys are interested. I really appreciate you watching. I have linked my Ko-Fi or Ko-fi in the description in case you'd like to help us make more videos. I've also linked my Instagram so you can keep up with my projects and my events. Otherwise, I will see you guys again very soon. Thank you again for watching, and bye for now.